Everybody, welcome back to the NBA Front Office Show. Oh my goodness, the times, they are a-changing. We've got some new rules to break down in the NBA and just a tidal wave of signings that we're right now in the midst of, and it's going to continue for at least the next few weeks as these new rules get implemented and the NBA tries to deal with this swell of COVID-19. Keith Smith, find him at Keith Smith at Keith Smith NBA on Twitter. Keith, man, this is hard to keep up with all the different signings that we're seeing now as a result of the new rules hitting the NBA.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been crazy. I think we're up to 100 different players this season now have been placed in health and safety protocols. Or maybe even more than that. It's hard to even keep track of that number. And then I know as of just a little bit ago, going off reported signings, I think the last one was Jamario Jones to your Lakers.
That's right.
He was the 26th hardship signing in the league already this year. And there's going to be more coming, as you said. We've got a whole bunch of stuff. But I think the place to start is the NBA and the NBPA, the Players Association, agreed to a modified rule set for how the hardship exception is going to work for a period of 1 month.
Yeah, let's start. There's some stuff about the two-way players in there, but let's save that for last. Let's start with the players who are currently in health and safety protocols and what this means. Essentially, what the NBA has said is that if you have a player going into health and safety protocols, that player needs to be replaced. And if, let's say, if you have at least two players, then you have to start replacing players. So if you have 5 players out due to health and safety protocols, that means by league rule, you now have to sign 4 players to hardship contracts. That'll be a 10-day contract for these players that you're bringing in to act as replacement players. Okay.
And to be clear on that too, just because I think this has been a little confusing around the timeline this morning. That's if you get below 13 total available players.
Right.
Because that's where, some people are thinking it's lose 4 and you immediately have to go get guys. You can lose 4 because that would take you down to 13, standard roster 17, 15 players on regular contracts, 2 players on 2 ways. And then it's after that it turns into a period of you have to start going and signing players. And as we're seeing with a lot of these cases, it's not ones and twos, it's 3s, 4s, 5s of players that are going in the protocols, and that's on top of teams that may already have a couple guys injured and the like.
So let's talk a little bit about the why. Like that's what is happening. The why this is happening, why the NBA is going down this route. Number one, they're first of all, they're trying to support teams. They're trying to make this as easy as possible, while at the same time making sure that games do not get postponed. So what they've done is they've decided that with the main goal being don't postpone games, don't cancel games, don't reschedule games, just keep things where they are right now. They are forcing teams essentially to sign these players. They're making that a requirement, again, based on the numbers that you've given us. Once they drop below that 13, they're making teams bring in these replacement players, but they're also trying to ease the burden of doing that by saying these players that come in, they will not count against the cap. So you don't have to worry about them stacking up in terms of hitting the hard cap for some teams. They will also not count towards the luxury tax. So if you're a luxury tax team, you don't have to worry about, oh my gosh, I'm bringing this guy in and this is his salary, but it's really going to cost me this much when I add in the luxury tax payments. Those things are out the window. So the NBA trying to, number one, kind of make sure that teams actually do this so that they have enough players to play. But then on the other hand, they're saying if we're going to force you to bring in replacement players and continue to play games, we're going to make it as easy as possible to do so.
Absolutely. In personal opinion, this is how the hardship exception should always work. I believe. I think because in a normal year, you have to get to 4 players out for at least 5 games and then going to be out for at least generally a 2-week period before you even qualify. And how teams get a hardship is they have to petition the league for it. In this case, they've cut that petitioning portion off. If it's for COVID related reasons, injury related reasons still exists. You still have to reach out to petition the league for that additional roster spot. You don't get any extra money to sign these players or anything like that. It's always been a roster exemption, not a salary cap exception. But in this case, this makes sense because what we're going to see with these signings of these players via hardship is teams who maybe said, making it up, but we've got 4 million under the hard cap. They're gonna have to eat into that 4 million at a couple hundred,
Sure.
about 100,000 or so at a time, and that's not what they want to do. They want to be able to keep that flexibility to make moves later down the line. The Brooklyn Nets, it was going to cost them about $500,000 in real dollars in tax penalties every time they signed a player to a hardship, and
Right.
the idea is you need the guy.
Right.
So why are we going to make it difficult on teams and those kind of things? Nothing changes as far as what the player gets paid. He's still going to get paid the full 10-day amount. There's just not going to be a hit on the cap or on the tax. And to give everybody an example of like how we're going to handle this at Spot Track, as well as how I'm handling it in my own personal salary sheets, I'm just putting the player on the roster with hardship next to them
Yeah.
in place of a salary, and then that way there's no accounting that goes onto the books or anything like that. So just kind of a general look there at how all these things are going to be accounted for.
Right. Right. And then I think the other angle of this that's interesting is that the NBA has put in a few little things. First of all, making you sign these players, right? It can be one less than the number of players that you have out, but you're required to do that, required to sign X number of players. And then also, you have to make that player available for your next game. They have to count towards the amount of players that you possibly have. So what the NBA foresaw potentially happening was a team like, let's say you're the Brooklyn Nets, right? And you've got Kevin Durant out, James Harden out, Kyrie Irving out. A team like the Nets could say, well, we're going to sign somebody. Oh, it took a little while to get the paperwork through. Oh, shoot. We only have 6 players available tonight. I guess we're going to have to postpone the game because there's a competitive advantage to doing that. You postpone the game till later, and then you get to play that game with all of your guys back, whereas you're much more likely to lose that game if you're playing with your replacement players. So the NBA foresaw that being potentially an issue, and that's why, number one, they force you to sign X number of replacement players or hardship players, whatever term we want to use, and that player has to be available to play in your next game, because the NBA didn't want to deal with that, with teams saying, well, we don't want to risk losing a game, so let's kind of be a little bit shady here and do what we can to try to make sure that the game gets postponed and we can make it up when we've got our guys back.
Yeah, absolutely. They kind of, by opening this up, they could have created some loopholes, but they did a pretty good job of closing those. I think this is a really good compromise for all parties involved here, because this is going to get rosters a little more filled out. The people who lose, quite frankly, are like that Nets Magic game the other night when it was played. That game should have been postponed because it was Nets versus Magic, and it's just not like
if you bought tickets.
You bought tickets to go watch essentially a G League game in effect, and the Nets had to do some stuff. The Nets had planned to rest Patty Mills in that game. They ended up playing him in a game they didn't really want to play him in. It was kind of a mess. So I think the league looked at it and said, all right, we've got these handful of postponements we need to do, and then we're going to get into really working through this. And it's a month, and there's nothing to say this won't continue past January 19th. Maybe it does go past that, but they're, I think, kind of taking let's get through this current wave right now. We'll reevaluate in a month and see where we're at. And then you mentioned the other tweak that they made was they've removed the cap on two-way players. It had been upped to 50 games this year, but they've removed it for the regular season. Two-way players will still not be eligible for any postseason games. So play-in tournament or playoffs, if you want them for those, you have to sign them to your regular roster, which we'll get into because we got official numbers on Garrison Matthews. Not that the Rockets are headed to the postseason anytime soon, but we saw we'll see some of those conversions happen down the line to get teams playoff eligible. But they did eliminate that cap on the two ways, and again, good smart decision. Players will get increased pay if they're on a two-way and play more games in the NBA. All around, this is I think a very good compromise by the players, the league, the teams, everybody involved to keep things moving. Because A pause was never in the cards. It
No.
was not going to happen. If anything, you would have seen cancellations, which nobody wants. It's not like it was a year ago. Everybody was screaming, shut the season down for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month, whatever it
You
was, and
can't
then
do that.
come back to it. The buildings aren't open like that anymore. It's not like it was a year ago. Things are open. There's concerts, there's events in these buildings, all kinds of other things. A lot of time, the basketball team is not the primary tenant in the building. They in some cases are second, maybe even third tier tenant. So that makes it really hard to get those things scheduled. So that's just kind of a thing to keep in mind, that's why, and the cancellations weren't happening because nobody wants to give up the revenue.
I also want to add, Keith, you and I have talked about this a lot, about how expansion is coming to the NBA at some point. At some point, this is coming, and the argument has long been, well, there's enough quality players out there to expand. What better test of that theory than this right now, right?
Sure.
Right now, we're getting to see hey, Isaiah Thomas, right, has come back in and he's scored 19 points and 13 points for the Lakers. That suggests he's an NBA player, right? So this is going to be a good chance to truly see the depth of talent that's out there. And again, I'm kind of searching for silver linings here, but also from a narrative perspective, we're going to see a lot of guys from seasons past that are going to be getting their shot to earn a place back in the NBA. And for a lot of them, it probably won't happen, but it's also possible that we do see some guys who play well enough during this stint that they do earn a spot in the NBA on a team somewhere. And so I think there's that element to this too, where we're going to see some guys who have had their hopes and dreams set on getting either back into the NBA or just into the NBA period that are going to get a chance to get noticed and to do just that on a big stage. And so that part of it will be interesting as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's cool parts about this, like you said, giving these guys an opportunity. Guys get to live out a dream, of suiting up. The Magic are going through that right now. They brought up 4 guys from their G League team, and with that, let's get into those mechanics real quick if we can, because a lot of people are saying, why is it not just a straight call up? For example, why are the Celtics not bringing players up from the main Celtics, or the Lakers bringing players up from the South Bay Lakers? It doesn't work that way. It's these guys are free agents in the G League. They are not attached to the NBA roster outside of the two-way players, and of course they're under contract and are going to be moved up. But what we're seeing here is these players are free agents. In some cases, they are going up to their affiliates. Like I mentioned, the Magic brought 4 players up. Some of that was, they were literally the Magic's G League affiliate in Lakeland, Florida, is about an hour or so down the road from Orlando, Florida. So it was very easy to say, all right, these guys are here. Let's get them to Orlando, and off we go. The Lakers, this one just broke, but Mason Jones, Sham Sharania just reporting while we're recording, is coming up from the South Bay Lakers.
He's been looking good for South Bay.
And so we're seeing some of this, but these are not a locked in thing where they can just bring these guys up immediately. Some have suggested, should it have been that way? I mean, maybe, but I don't, maybe these players are looking at, as you said, some of these guys may stick, right? Some of these guys, I think, are looking at it and saying, hey, I can go to this team, and I kind of like my chance to look pretty good in the 10 days that I'm there, maybe a little longer if things go that way, and I can look pretty good, and maybe they'll keep me over another player when the 10 days expire. That could be the direction this goes. So I don't want to take that freedom away from players who aren't under contracts, because there's nothing stopping these teams if they really want a player. Like Celtics fans get a little upset that Theo Pinson joined the Dallas Mavericks. Well, if the Celtics really want Theo Pinson, they could waive a player on their roster and go sign Theo Pinson. I do not want to see players' freedom of movement shut down at all by any reasons, but because of just COVID stuff that's going on. They let it work the way it's always worked.
Absolutely. Jumping in on that Mason Jones thing, that means there's another move coming. Because according to Shams, he's getting a 2-way contract. The Lakers have already used their 2-way contract. So that means that Shawnee Brown or Jay Huff.
He did say 2-way.
Yeah, one of those guys is obviously no longer going to be on a 2-way contract. Now, what that means exactly, we don't know just yet. But obviously, they have to be making a move to free up a 2-way contract in order to give it to Mason Jones.
Yeah, that is interesting. I completely missed that part of it. So yeah, let's see where that goes. Right, Chaundi Brown and Jay Huff are
Uh-huh.
the two-way players. We did see just in the last couple days the Philadelphia 76ers waived Grant Riller, who was on a two-way contract. They waived him because um but he's out with an injury, and they're in a position where they need players, and they signed Miles Powell out of the G League. Powell's a guy who's kind of bounced around a
Hmm.
little bit on teams on and off in the preseason and the like over the last couple of years. Seton Hall products played well in the G League, so they're bringing him in on a two-way. So I wonder if maybe there's something there. Maybe Brown or Huff is going to be unavailable for some reason, and clearly we know the Lakers are going through it and need some bodies healthy right now. But Mason Jones is an interesting prospect. So let's see where that one ultimately goes.
Yeah, we'll see what they wind up doing there. But in any event, big picture, lots of new players coming into the NBA right
Yeah.
now, and this is also proof that the NBA, they are dead set on not postponing the season, not postponing games or anything like that. They plan to just keep playing right through this thing. We saw
Yep.
the NBA or the NFL recently approved rules to essentially, it's a little bit more nuanced than this, but essentially stop testing players who are vaccinated unless they are symptomatic. And again, there's some spot checks and things like that that the NFL is doing, so I don't want to oversimplify it like that. But that's kind of the way that's heading. We'll see how that plays out. There have been some calls, according to an ESPN report, as well as a report on The Athletic, for the NBA to do something similar, coaches and players who've wanted something like that to happen. So I don't know if that's the way this is headed ultimately, but for now, this is going to be the NBA's solution in order to keep playing and not lose games to what's going on.
Yeah, so let's talk about games that weren't necessarily lost, but games that
Postponed.
are been postponed.
Yeah.
Let's get into that. There were 5 games postponed over the weekend and into this week. So let me pull them up so we don't miss any. We already know that Bulls had the first 2 postponed last week, which was their they had Detroit Pistons and Toronto Raptors games postponed.
Uh-huh.
3 games postponed on Sunday. Denver Nuggets at Brooklyn Nets, Cleveland Cavaliers at Atlanta Hawks, New Orleans Pelicans at Philadelphia 76ers. Those were all postponed. And then today, Monday, as we're recording this, Orlando Magic at Toronto Raptors, and then Washington Wizards at Brooklyn Nets. Tomorrow night was postponed. That one was a TNT game. That has been replaced by Pacers Heat on TNT. So we'll see. So that's a total number of 7 games postponed that'll need to be made up. For a handful for a couple teams there. The Nets now have a couple that need made up. The Raptors have a couple. The Bulls have a couple. So we'll see where those get slotted into the schedule, because they're just going to have to do their best to find openings there. But very clear the league's messaging: postponements versus cancellations. That those games are intended to be made up. One other thing as an aside before we start getting into signings and all the other things that have happened, keep an eye on things in Toronto. The Warriors didn't bring players to Toronto for their last game of a road trip. They kept a lot of their they actually sent their regulars home to San Francisco ahead of going back. So that was kind of interesting. There is the rules will change here shortly. Sounds like there may even be fast track to change, where you won't be able to come in to Canada if you're unvaccinated before a bunch of people start screaming and yelling. It's Canada. It's a completely different country. They can make whatever rules and laws they want to make.
This is not the NBA making those rules.
Exactly. This is not the NBA. This is the country of Canada. But the other thing is Quebec, which is clearly a different province than Toronto is in. Toronto is in the Ontario province, but Quebec just shut everything down again. Effective today, this evening, they're shutting everything down again. So we're going to see what that kind of looks like here with the Raptors. If Ontario does something similar, we'll see. They've already reduced capacity in the Raptors building to 50%. So we're going to have to just keep an eye out on what happens with the Raptors, because despite them operating under the same NBA rules, Canadian government's rules and local government, the
That
local
supersedes.
government supersedes anything the NBA wants to do. So we will see. Just something to keep an eye on with the Raptors moving forward here.
Okay, that's definitely something to keep an eye on. That could obviously change. I mean, this is part of why the Raptors played last season in Tampa Bay, right? Because of some of the rules and everything in Canada. So we'll see where that winds up going. But Keith, I know I have not been able to keep up with all of it, but you apparently have.
I have.
Let's get into the list. It's interesting because what you're about to hear is a list full of some players from years past, as well as maybe some players that you haven't heard of that much that are now going to be playing for various NBA teams once again. So this is going to be a little bit of a trip down memory lane, and there'll be a few head scratch. Keith, do not throw in a made up name because I will probably not catch it.
I thought about doing it, and I was like, no, this isn't the time for that. We'll wait until we get into the off season, and I'll do one of those. So we are up to 27 different players have signed hardships or are reported to be signing under the hardship. That's there was one dropped while we were recording that wasn't Mason Jones. It was a different one.
Mm-hmm.
With that, there's been 29 total hardship deals because Davin Reed and Alfonso McKinney have each signed a second 10-day
Right.
with the Denver Nuggets and Chicago Bulls, respectively. So Stanley Johnson was one of the other ones. He was the second earliest to sign. Fortunately, never played because he signed and immediately went into the health and safety protocols. Then the Brooklyn Nets, they're up to 3 already: Langston Galloway, James Ennis, and Shaq Harrison. And then Wenyen Gabriel has been reportedly going to sign a 10-day with the Nets. That one has not come through yet. Something that to keep in mind with these is teams will generally start 10 days, whether it's this scenario here or even when it's a more normal 10-day.
Mm-hmm.
They will start those on a game day, because what that does is that allows them to get the maximum usage out of that player.
Yes.
So you rarely are going to bring a player in on an off day on a 10-day. Usually we'll start with a game. So some of these may not materialize for the next day or
You're
two.
talking about officially. Like we'll hear, like, okay, so
Yeah,
like the
we'll hear
Lakers don't play today.
Yep.
Jamario Jones, he's not officially going to sign until tomorrow.
Correct.
Right. Yes.
Most likely.
Most likely.
All right. So then we mentioned the 4 Orlando Magic guys: Aleem Ford, Hassani Gravett, BJ Johnson, Admiral Schofield. Johnson and Schofield have had cups of coffee in the NBA
Mm-hmm.
previous. You mentioned the Lakers, Isaiah Thomas there, as well as Jamario Jones is the other one. So Jamario Jones has bounced around a little bit, primarily with the Lakers. And then IT is playing well, I think, from what I've seen. I think he looks pretty good.
He has.
Again, Justin Robinson with the Sacramento Kings. He's coming to give them some additional point guard depth. He's a guy who'd been on a 2-way prior to that. Tyler Hall with the New York Knicks, a guy who'd gone to camp with the Knicks. Boston Celtics jumped in with Justin Jackson. And then this name
and
CJ Miles.
CJ Miles. He's back.
Yeah. I was not expecting that. 15-year veteran. CJ Miles was playing with the G League Ignite. In the G League, the Ignite, for those who maybe are new to this, they are the team that is made up of high school prospects that are trying to make the jump from prep to pros. And what they do is they fill that roster out with NBA veteran guys. So CJ Miles, Amir Johnson, they've tended to go for guys, at least a couple, that have also made that jump from high school to the pros because they help. And CJ Miles was one of them. So 15-year vet headed to Boston. That one is official too.
This is like the Royal Rumble. Right? When the buzzer sounds and it's that guy from like 10 years ago whose music hits and again you haven't seen, and then that guy comes flying in. This is the NBA version of that. CJ Miles, and it's only a matter of time before Lance Stevenson winds up somewhere too. That's what's happening right now.
Yeah, probably with that one. The Cleveland Cavaliers are going to add a couple names that are probably recognizable to folks. Justin Anderson, he's been around the league for several years, former first-round draft pick. And then Luke Cornett. Big man was playing with the Maine Celtics. He is going to go to Cleveland because we all know they need another 7-footer, even though they're down a couple 7-footers. You got to have a minimum of 3 in your starting lineup in Cleveland at all times. Dallas has officially signed Theo Pinson, a guy who, again, been on 2-way contracts, been with the Nets and the Knicks in the past. And then they are reportedly going to bring another name people recognize, Marquise Chris, into the fold as well. So that one hasn't gone final yet, but that'll come. The New York Knicks, Damian Dotson and Matt Mooney, a couple of guards coming into New York. New York's guard depth has been so decimated due to injuries and COVID that something we put on our rundown and skipped past. Kemba Walker got back in the rotation, started, and played great. For the Knicks against the Celtics. He had 29 points, looked really, really good in that game. And then post-game, when asked, how hard it's been to be out of the rotation, said, I hate it. I want to play. I was very open on that and said, I want to play. So we'll see where that ultimately goes with Kemba in the Knicks, but getting his opportunity there. Reported signing coming for the Orlando Magic, Freddie Gillespie. He would be their 5th player on a hardship deal coming in. He's a guy who was with the Raptors last year and in training camp with Toronto this year. Speaking of Toronto, they're going to add 4 players, some NBA veteran names. Brandon Goodwin, backup guard, had been with the Hawks prior. Tyler Johnson, NBA veteran's been around a very long time. He's going to head off to Toronto. Juwan Morgan, who was with the Jazz a couple years ago, he was also playing for the Maine Celtics. The Maine Celtics must be doing something right because they are losing like half their roster here today. And then just breaking while we're recording, Mark Stein reports Nick Stauskas going to be called up to the Raptors.
Sauce Castillo.
As well. So,
Welcome
Castillo,
back.
Yeah.
Sauce Castillo. Nick Rocks, right?
Yeah.
Right,
Nick
Sacramento
Rocks,
Kings.
That's it. Yep. So we'll see Nick Stauskas back in the NBA here. And then we'd mentioned it already under the Lakers, but Jamario Jones coming back. So we're up to Stauskas, as it broke, as we were recording, 28th player on a hardship contract already. A lot of these still to go official, but 28 reported players to sign hardship deals. I spoke to some folks with the NBA and with the G League, and they said that over 30 players had transportation arranged out of Las Vegas last night and this morning in anticipation of signing hardship deals with NBA teams. The G League, outside of two clubs, is gathered in Las Vegas. The Raptors 905 and Windy City Bulls are both shut down due to COVID. So the other teams are all there in Las Vegas for the G League Showcase.
That makes me nervous. All of the replacement players, essentially, the pool of replacement players are all together in one place.
Yeah. That's a little scary. The good news is heavy testing going on there.
Yes.
Clearly with that, but yeah, it is a little interesting, to see where that ultimately goes. So, but it's, guys coming out. There's, as you mentioned, vast majority of these guys are coming out of the G League. That's where teams are going to sign players. Handful of guys, maybe not going to come out of the G League, maybe just veterans that teams have been keeping tabs on and know are in shape and are ready to go. So, but that's where we're at. So there it is. There's your rundown of the 28 hardship contracts. Many have already been signed and many more to be signed. And then many more, I'm sure, will be reported on here in the next couple of days.
Now, I guess here's a question to finish things off. Once a player, so let's say a team has 7 players that are out and they sign however many players they need to in order to make up for that, in order to get back up to 13. Let's say they sign 3 players to these hardship exceptions, and then 6 of those 7 players that were out test out of protocols. How does that scenario play out?
No, that's a great question. You need to immediately get back into roster compliance. So what would happen in that case is those players, excuse me, I couldn't even get it to mute. It came on too quick. Those players would be, in general, what would likely happen is those players would be waived from their current contracts. And then what would happen beyond that is those players would then be returned back to the G League or wherever they were. Every once in a while, you'll see a player head overseas after a successful 10-day versus going back to the G League. But those are fairly few and far between. But yeah, those teams would have to get back. Let's say you fall in love with a player and he plays great, like the Lakers. I'll use them as an example because we've seen Isaiah Thomas already play well. If the Lakers are like, man, we got to keep Isaiah Thomas, we can't let him get back to free agency because someone else will snap him up on us, then they're gonna have to waive somebody to keep him around. They're not going to be able to just move him out via any other means. That they would have to waive somebody, open up the roster spot, and bring him in that way. So that's just something to keep an eye on with these guys if they really, really play well.
So these 10-day contracts do not guarantee 10 days. Is what it ultimately comes down to.
Player will still get paid.
Yes,
full
right.
10 days. In this case, because these cap hits are going away on these hardship signings. But if it's a regular 10-day, because it's the same process on a regular 10-day, what they call it is an early termination. Player does not go through any form of waivers. They are instantly made a free agent. 10 days terminated. Full cap hit hits the books. Full tax hit hits the books, and the player goes returns to free agency. Player also gets their full 10-day payment, but in this case, for these hardship signings, we know there is no cap or tax hit, but it does not have to be 10 days. So if you have something where you have a player false positive or whatever it was, come up and they're out, the teams can move on and waive these guys almost immediately.
Right. Well, interesting time in the NBA, right? I know we did not expect to be talking about CJ Miles joining a team this year or any of these guys that are now suddenly popping up, but here we are. The NBA turning to these hardship contracts in order to get through this. And again, they're going to reevaluate in January, so it'll be about a month. They'll reevaluate and we'll see where things are at. But this is the plan for right now, to get through this and continue to play games. So Keith, it's again a very quickly changing situation, but that's the world we're living in right now.
Yeah, I mean, we just gave you the list. There's probably going to be at least, I would say, another 5-6 players signed
before I even publish this.
Games play. So by the time you actually hear this, there'll probably be some guys missing off of this list as well. And then on the positive side, we're seeing some teams already get players cleared, and a lot of these players are coming out and saying they felt fine the entire time. That's a whole other debate we're not going to get into here, but that's good news. And like the Bulls yesterday, maybe not great news for your Lakers, but good news for the Bulls is they got some players back, and DeMar DeRozan came back and looked like he didn't miss a beat. I mean, looked great yesterday. And
he did say, he had those comments that, and this is, I mean, not getting into the debate at all, but just this is what you want to hear. DeMar DeRozan said the biggest problem while he was out was he was bored.
Yes.
He said he had no symptoms. He felt totally fine. He was just bored. And that's just on a personal level. That's what you want to hear. That's what you want. That's the ideal. If a player's going to have to sit out, you don't want to hear that they're going through certainly what Joel Embiid went through, something like that. You want to hear that they were just fine and now they're back and everything's okay and they're back on the floor and they're producing. Obviously, DeRozan dropped 38 points. So, I mean, and that's great. That's what you want to hear from each of these players, and hopefully that is what we start to hear more of.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there is a hope that we'll get through this wave and then it'll really kind of calm down. It's roughly a fifth of the league right now. And currently, right now, I think is in the health and safety protocols this month alone. So I think I'm re-looking at the numbers. It's 113 total different players have gone in this season. 100 of them this month in the first 3 weeks of December.
Oh, man. That is staggering. That's a high number, but said the NBA, they're gonna do everything they can to push through this.
Keep plugging.
All right, everybody, give us your thoughts in the comment section down below. What do you think about this plan put forth by the NBA Players Association, to get through everything? Give us your thoughts, and do you have some players that you've been thinking about? Hey, this guy should be on an NBA team. Fire it off in the comment section. Let us know who you would like to see picked up, because there's going to be a lot of players being added to teams that maybe should be in the NBA right now. So let us know what you think, some names that you can put out there. Everybody, we'll see you next time, but please make sure you do stay safe.